Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Bowling. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Timeline Theater, and I am very happy today to be the moderator of our discussion concerning the kind of world around the play Eureka Day. This is not just a conversation about Eureka Day. I want to say that two of my guests are one has seen the production, one has worked on the production, and the third, Adam, has been able to see clips of the production. And so we do want to be able to talk a little bit about the play, but mainly we're talking about some of the issues that arise around the play. And I also just think it's maybe smart to start this all out by saying, here we are going to have a webinar style conversation about a play where the webinar style conversation is the most laughable, screwed up part of the entire play. So I'm not unaware of that irony. I just want to bring that up, and how funny and kind of meta this whole moment sort of is in a way. But I'm really anxious to get started to talk to all three of our guests today and hear some of their thoughts about some of the issues we're going to be talking about are maybe consensus and individual versus community, the rise of neoliberalism and its effect on the social contract, the challenges of online conversation and webinars just such as these, et cetera. Those are some of the things we'll try to get to today. But I'm also going to ask my guests to talk to each other and feel free to talk directly and ask each other questions. And this is hopefully meant to be a conversation. You all are absolutely welcome to pop questions into the chat here, like the characters in the play, hopefully with a little more of a thoughtfulness than some of the characters in the play who are not real people after all. And we will try to answer as many of those questions as we can. I'll sort of take them as we go. And if the Q&A, please, not in the chat. Okay, yes, ask them in the question and answer. Apparently that'll make sense to folks, not in the chat. Okay, I want to start with just having everybody. My relationship to this play is just that we read this play about a year ago, and it caused quite a stir within Timeline, the company itself. Rarely do we have plays that create a sense of conflict within the 15 company members that read the play. And there were people that were vehemently against the play, mainly because I think they weren't sure this is the right time to kind of push back on liberalism and progressivism and yet I say that, and I'm not even necessarily supposed to talk outside that room about how we felt, but it's interesting because I think everybody's come around to really loving that we've produced this play and loving the humor of it and the conversations that it started. Anyway, so I guess I just wanted to sort of start out by saying that, and I've watched the play many, many times and I've been a part of the production of the play, but I'm anxious to talk to the three of you about your connections to this play. So let's start by I'll just ask each of you to introduce yourselves and maybe tell us a little bit about where your work intersects with some of the issues around the play. And how about I start, why don't I start with Adia and you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Adia Benton. I am an anthropologist, a medical anthropologist by training. I teach at Northwestern and have written extensively about pandemics, about social responses to them, political responses, and basically a lot of the questions about like how institutions respond to outbreaks and pandemics and how communities respond to those responses. So
right.
This was interesting. Yeah.
Good. Adam, can you introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. So my name's Adam Davis. I live out in Portland, Oregon, and run an organization called Oregon Humanities. Lived in Chicago for a long time. What we do out here and what I was doing in Chicago was a lot of community conversation work, getting people around Oregon and the country talking across differences of background and belief, trying to listen to each other and figure out where the differences and the commonalities are, especially with hard questions, so you can see where it might resonate with Eureka Day.
Great. And Grace?
Yeah, my name is Grace Herman. I'm a dramaturg and director in the Chicago area, and I worked as the assistant dramaturg on this play. So I got to be in the room and the rehearsal process, and a lot of my work was helping to make sure that the production we were putting on was supported by the real world context that it lives in. So I did a lot of research on all of the different contexts and social and political and medical situations that build up this play to help support the actors to make sure they understand and have a rich understanding of what's going on around them in the conversation in the room and in the show they put on. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everybody. One thing I remember when Lillian, who directed this play and who got us thinking about it in a new way, I remember she brought up the concept of consensus theory early on when we were talking about this play. And, one thing I have to say is I had a misunderstanding of the word consensus, because I'd always thought consensus meant that kind of like that 80% of the group agreed to something. The play gets more into the detail of consensus, meaning that nobody disagrees with the decision. That was sort of new to me. I didn't understand that, and the play certainly deals with that idea, because for everyone who's seen the play, and certainly we will be talking a little bit about the play today and some of the details of the play. So for those of you that are watching that haven't seen it, I think most of you have. That's my guess. But sorry to anyone that's getting, there may be a couple things. I don't think any of it will ruin the play for you. But the point is that in the play, this idea of consensus, it surprised me when consensus sounds like a very, it's treated in this very kind of white progressive school as a more thoughtful, open-minded way of governing. And I guess but then when I saw that idea of like, well, one person can stop it theoretically, I guess I would like to just talk about that for a second. If that surprises you, is that an idea, Adam? I was a particular guess in your work of community consensus. I'm guessing that's a word that you must come across a lot. And do you deal with this notion of consensus theory?
We're explicitly not trying to build consensus. What we're trying to do is make it more likely that people will understand each other's perspectives. We're doing slightly more reflective rather than deliberative work. But if you think about a jury, for example, 1 of 12 that dissents can stop the whole thing. We have a lot of processes in place where this is a core part of it. It's not a core part of the work that I do, though I do have a staff, and we try to figure out how we're going to make decisions ourselves. There are lots of different ways to do it.
Yeah. Adia, do you have thoughts about that too? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So as I was thinking, the funny thing is in Chicago during the COVID pandemic, my kids actually went to a progressive social justice oriented school, and we had these conversations that were very similar. And so I was like, oh, wow. And I happen to be in Oakland right now, where very close to where this play is taking place in a similar thing. And one of the things about consensus that struck me in this play was, as an anthropologist, is that consensus also kind of assumes that everyone's sort of coming in with the same values, and that there is a kind of, and also on equal footing, like in terms of how, whether a person's opinion or idea or set of orientations to the idea not only are understood by everybody, but people can kind of come to there's a point at which an agreement can be reached, and everyone can be satisfied by it on the basis of their own social positioning. Right. Yeah. And that seemed to be the conflict all along, right? Which was, for people, I'm sure everyone's seen the play, but that's the conflict all along, is how are people coming to this? If you have children who are vulnerable, if you have the ability to stay at home with your children without any other, all of these things kind of shape the ability to come to that kind of agreement.
Great. Grace, obviously Eureka Day is about how I always want to say this to everybody. This play was written in 2018, before COVID, before our pandemic. and it's sort of a made up pandemic of mumps, and really how this outbreak of mumps in this one very quote unquote progressive school in Berkeley, California, how it undermines kind of every sense of governing and it brings to light all of these kind of hidden agendas and anger and upset and disagreements, and in some ways it brings to light a place that thought it was in consensus and that it was sort of a singular minded group of people, and it becomes clear that they are not that thing. Oh, you want to talk about that a little bit and how you all dealt with that in the rehearsal room a bit?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are super interesting about this play, especially being written before the COVID pandemic, is I think it becomes really easy as a culture to be like, oh, that was just COVID. That just happened in that unique moment when all of these conversations and these tensions were existing before the explosion that was. So I think, so we talked about that a lot of like, what were it's like this is the foreseeing almost what would become this big cultural moment. So there was that. And then we talked a lot about of like their whole thing is that they're trying to create this place where everybody wins. But what does that look like? Especially the way Adia was talking about it. Like they all have they have different jobs. Their situations with their spouses are different. Their kids are different. One of the kids like it's really sick. And like how does that change the whole story? And like what does winning look like? So we talked a lot about that. And then also a big point of these characters of how do we not villainize them? How that no one here is a villain. And how do we just believe that they were all coming from like a pure place? Like they weren't trying to be, it's really easy to play these characters as malicious people. Like it would be easy to fall into like the Karen archetype or things like that. And so we talked a lot about like how to keep these characters grounded. So when they're having these conversations and trying to reach consensus, it's almost harder to disagree because there's like an earnestness in these things that they're looking to get. Yeah.
I love all the things you all said about Adam. Interesting that you started out by saying, "Hey, consensus is not something we're going for," and Adia, you make basically the same point, and that's what we were trying to learn there. But doesn't that mean, though, that we're talking about a world where I guess what I'm wanting to know is, does that affect us trying to come together as right now we're in a country that's maybe this is true. We all think it's probably true, but more kind of split and further split as a country of sort of a right and a left in this country as ever before. How do you find, if not consensus, how do you find community? How do you find some sense of coming together? Obviously, the first steps, as you pointed out, are by understanding that you're not all the same. But that almost sounds like, okay, so then we all sit in our point of view, and how do we move forward if we can't find some kind of common ground? Adam, I suspect that's a lot of the work that you're doing. Can you talk about how or maybe I'm wrong, so you tell me how you would handle that question that I brought up.
Well, I mean, one first thought is we wouldn't go see a play if we assumed we would all think about it the same way.
Yeah.
One of the reasons to see this stuff is so that we can share how we differ as well as where we might overlap. And unanimity is not something anybody strives for. What we want is cohesion, and we want something like trust and understanding rather than sameness. Now, we do need to make decisions together in order to have a meaningful public that we live in. That's the challenge. So how can we do that when we disagree? We all have deep experience of making decisions amid disagreement, starting with the families we live in and moving through school, friends, jobs, everything. And then the question is, what happens when it's the public? It's not people we choose, it's not people that are close, and it matters, as Adia was saying, especially when things land on us differently. How do we still go ahead and take the deep breath and recognize we're not going to get everything we want, but we need to give up some of what we most want so that the larger we is whole in some way. That's the challenge. That's what we're living through. I do want to say just real quickly about timing. There's a Chicago-based author, Eula Biss, who wrote a book in 2014 called On Immunity, which explores these questions beautifully. And if you want to go further back, Adia, you said, looking at pandemics in different places and times. And I still think Camus' The Plague is another good place to think about many of these same questions. Now I'll stop talking.
No, that's awesome. The sorry, the I guess I want to, Adia, feel free to respond to that too if you'd like. Sorry.
It's funny, I've been teaching this stuff at least since 2012. And I actually often, there was, I think, a This American Life story about a measles outbreak after I think this is one of the Disneyland one. Basically, one of the reference point for current, we have measles, we have a measles epidemic currently, right? And so, I think that one was called something like Ruining It for Everyone Else is the name of that one. But it touches on this question of the sort of balancing the individual responsibility versus the responsibility to the collective. Understanding that, say, a 9-month-old cannot get a measles vaccine and therefore won't be protected. So there's this piece. But I think I'm trying to think of, there's so many things that I wanted to say in response to that, because I think one of the challenges is always, at least in the work that I do, is who is the community, right? Like this is the public health, they have a public. The public is everyone within a specific municipality or county or whatever. And one of the challenges that I think has arisen is not just about one of our problems is that we have increasingly our state, the state, has receded from some of its responsibilities in terms of caring for the population, right? And in fact, one of the things that we're pushing against, and I think have been in the past 20 or 30 years, is that means that we've had to rely on ourselves. There's a whole lot of devolution of responsibility to people. So, you've seen the wellness industry flourish under these circumstances, right? Where everyone's like, oh, well, if you, eat the right things, do all of the, what are they calling it? Fiber maxing or protein maxing or whatever, the children. If you're doing all of these things, then you're going to be okay. All the other vulnerable people, for whatever reason, are, left to their own devices. And I think that's been kind of I think that got really illuminated for us during COVID, that even though I think this is something that I know that it's something that's been going on for a really long time. And I don't know if I'm making any sense, but this whole, I was reading this book, Doppelganger, fabulous book. And she was talking about how her yoga people were saying, I don't want to wear masks. If these people they need to eat carrots and exercise more if they want to be less vulnerable. That's an ethos that I think is spreading as a result of this sort of devolution of responsibility. That's what I was saying with neoliberalism. Yeah. We've been privatized, everything's been privatized, individualized. So that care and that responsibility is we're being socialized into that. On the other hand, we are seeing communities building up around, I guess, shared responsibility, mutual aid, caring for others. Right. That's what a lot of the sort of pro-masking, pro-vaccine stuff is about. Anyway, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, jump in, Grace. Great.
Yeah, it brought up an interesting thing to me. I feel like there's been a lot of discussion about protecting your peace, and that being for wellness, pushing towards individualism. And it's everything that you're saying of it's for our mental health, it's better in ways if we cut ourselves off from people. And what a twisted, interesting narrative that becomes. Yeah.
That's great.
And how detrimental to the overall health of a community, truly.
Yeah. This notion of neoliberalism, again, a concept I guess I've been aware of, but I've frankly done a little bit of last minute research into this. And do you have any sense about where quote unquote neoliberalism began? Adia, you just said it began a while back, but I saw it connected to sort of Milton Friedman and to Ronald Reagan and so through, some conservative voices, obviously. It's a funny word, new liberalism, but and the notion of the social contract. I'm really interested in that idea as well, and maybe the breakdown of the social contract when what we end up, when the other side of that, the versus, is individual freedoms. That is certainly a big part of this play. I know there was a couple questions in there, but maybe I'll start with you, Adia. Do you have thoughts about that? And do you have any sense of that? Do you have any sense yourself of where that notion of neoliberalism began, or when?
So, I guess folks see it as fairly old in terms of its earliest elaboration. So, like Hayek, these other economists who are, yes, conservative ones. Yeah. But the rise, I think, within my area of social science, like we think of neoliberalism as having had its sort of real emergence in the 1980s, in terms of like, there is no society, or the state has to, like, the anti-state state is what some people call it. Look, my daughter arrived. She didn't get the memo. She's a teenager. She's got a nice attitude. So I was like, how perfect. So we were, the anti-state state. Oh, we want to, it's the state that attacks itself, that says, oh, we need less of us as we're, and so what the rise of that is private contractors working, filling in for what the government or the state was sort of supposed to be doing. And we see that, I was like, oh, I want to talk about that. And so we see that in how even public health works. Like one of the things I was talking about with my kids when we were in the progressive school, the social justice school, we had a committee for COVID. And one of the things that we discovered was that our state, county health, and city health departments didn't use the same surveillance systems for the disease because they use different contractors. And so our state, like our governments, were not able to manage effectively all of these different systems because of this policy, or this frame, a way of thinking about governance emerged 40 years ago, right? This is how we save money. We don't hire people in the government themselves. We pay a company to do that work. We offload all of the benefits and the responsibilities of the pensions from this. And so, but there's also a cultural dimension of neoliberalism, which is, again, this idea that you're shunting off a lot of that responsibility for being well onto communities, onto families, as providing that social safety net. And that social safety net was the responsibility of the state, right? Like this idea that, in exchange for our freedoms, we allow the state to do certain things for us, to take care of us, to make sure we're safe, make sure we're cared for, all of these other things. And, this happens to different degrees in different places, right? Canada, Italy, they have a very different kind of relationship to the population, to the people who are being governed, to citizens. And so, like I said, I think there's a cultural dimension to this, which is how people in our society imagine their responsibility to others. How do we push against that? Which I think was a really interesting lesson of the play. That whole, you didn't make her a Karen, but she, you didn't want to make her a Karen, but she sort of embodied this, I care about the well-being of the community. I do, but I should be able to make my own decisions.
Yeah.
To care for my child.
Yeah.
And to do my, and you understand, anyway.
Oh, those are all amazing points, Adia. And Adam, if you got any thoughts about any of that, I'm interested in this notion of the government sort of backing off, being taking on that responsibility as a social mandate, that the public health is less and less a governmental responsibility, and the notion that leads to this individualism. I love, Adia, what you said earlier about how that means you're chasing after a fiber diet today, but tomorrow you're chasing after a protein diet, and then you're chasing after a whatever, an all plant-based diet or whatever it ends up being. And somehow I can't help but think how that all is also very much about profits and about different industries and making more money ultimately. Adam, jump in there whenever
Sure.
you like.
Sure. I like thinking about different kinds of diets. For me, multiple diets work because I'm
Good. Me
less
too.
hungry. Um, you asked about neoliberalism, and that's what Adia was talking about. But I think it is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and it's worth noting that, like, actually, neoliberalism builds on the founding story that we tell ourselves about the country, which is it's not a declaration of interdependence, it's a declaration of independence. And it is true that they're talking about independence from another country to form our own. So there's another we that's being constituted, but the founding myth, the founding story, again, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, those founding stories are individualistic. And so neoliberalism is simply emphasizing something that's at the core of our national self-understanding from the get-go. And that's a reaction to a bunch of things, but it's a reaction to some cultures where the expectation is more duty than right. So that's also to go back to what Adia was saying a little bit. That is, we have emphasized freedom over a lot of other things, and we like the story. And when I say we, of course, anytime you say we, that's the challenge. It's like, who are you drawing in with the we? But nationally, there has been a persistent story about what's sometimes called rugged individualism or just individualism. That's persistent, and that gets really hard when we run into things like health challenges or public transit or other things that are good for more than just me. So I bring that up just to say, yes, neoliberalism, and yes, Chicago has a big role in neoliberalism. But liberalism itself is both an attempt to pay more attention to and safeguard individual freedom, and a big step towards the challenges that neoliberalism elevates even more.
Adia, you mentioned that Jonathan Spector, who wrote this play, is kind of brilliant at how he weaves this notion of community and individual needs, and makes it very complicated in some ways. As you said, there's a quote unquote Karen type character who then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I understand where she's coming from, because her story is very kind of, it gets I think it gets the audience, kind of relating to her and connecting to her and understanding her. And that complication is where you get to see theater happening. Grace, I thought maybe you would like to talk about that just a little bit, about some of those discoveries that happened in the room regarding some of these topics.
Yeah, I remember particularly there was one rehearsal where it was the Suzanne character and the Karina character. So this Karen character and then the character that comes in and is the new person on the committee. And these characters are often seen as like they're butting heads through the majority of this show, and really where a lot of the conflict lies. And so I remember it being hard as like for the actors to like have these conversations and figure out where these characters were coming from, and especially when they're disagreeing, of like when in the room the character you're playing, when you don't agree with them necessarily, how to like lean into the full like humanness of that and like find this empathy for these characters. And I think this is an interesting part of this conversation of consensus, is like, what is the role that empathy plays in this? Because and being able to have these conversations where with consensus, where it's not everyone like agreeing and that's like their vote and 100% their first choice, but something that everyone can live with, And we talked about empathy in the room a lot, and just in general, it's like empathy just being the huge piece of that. And it's definitely something it feels like in this moment that we're missing as a country. Yeah.
I want to encourage everybody that's listening to feel free. Now is a great time for you to ask any questions that you might want to ask. Put them in the Q&A, as Lara said, or maybe she said that on the chat, but whatever. We'll get them on the chat, but maybe easier to put them in on the Q&A section at the bottom here. Oh, is there one there? It's fair. Oh, there's a comment there that that consensus is a recurring plot point. Yes, that is certainly true. One of the fun scenes of this play, and I think you're all familiar with it, is this scene 3. Scene 3 in the play is what we call the Zoom scene of the play, the online kind of webinar scene. And Adia, I know we've been back and forth about this a little bit, and I just wondered if you could talk about your thoughts about, communication in the modern age. And I wonder how communication and that sort of, it's again ironic that here we are on our own webinar having this, while there's other people kind of watching that we're not really terribly aware of, but they're there listening. What this kind of communication, how it helps, how it hurts, is it, there's obviously some values to these. And the fact is, this would be much harder to get the two of you and Grace maybe all together in a theater after a show and get audiences to be able to stay, because, it's shit. I'll tell you this, that's always a big challenge, because people want to go out and use the restroom, and then they decide maybe I'll just leave because I'm already out of the theater, and these kind of conversations are sometimes tricky to happen. This format for us is great, but it is a complicated format, and it takes communication to a very different place, where there's less connection in the communication sometimes, and things can be thrown in and somewhat anonymous and et cetera. And so I guess I wanted to know your thoughts. Let's start with you, Adia, about your thoughts about how this kind of communication is helpful, or if it's not helpful at all, et cetera, how it could be more helpful.
I mean, so, one of the things I said to you is I thought that was probably the most brilliant scene. The audience loved it. It was just, they were talking about it as they were, the laughter was hilarious. The time, it's all about timing, all of the things. But the thing that, as I was taking notes during the production, which was also very funny, like, what are you doing? Why are you and I remember thinking, I was like, oh, this is a really interesting scene, because of it, because it kind of shows you the affordances of certain kinds of media. Like, and what I mean by that is, like, it was staged as a webinar with a chat.
Yes.
So you didn't see a lot of the, see the faces, nobody got to talk. And so in some ways it created a kind of side conversation. And I was like, what would have happened if it had been a fully participatory meeting online? Would that have changed the dynamic? It's an opportunity for people, even though their names are there and of course they know each other, it's an opportunity for people to kind of hit out at each other, like to and not actually face consequences for being rude. Yeah. And so it just kind of, I used to use Zoom before COVID, but during this thing, it was actually quite interesting to watch that. All of this to say, I kept thinking about other ways that we communicate and how that shapes kind of the discourse about these really touchy topics, right? Like, for example, I was on Twitter quite frequently from this Ebola pandemic that I'm writing about right now. And WhatsApp became a way that people were like constantly sort of sharing information about how to get better, what not to do. Oh, they're stealing people's bones or stealing people's whatever. I know it sounds crazy what I'm saying, but that's also what was happening during COVID. It happens during all these things. And so anyway, my point being is the platform itself kind of produces the kind of communities and the kinds of discussions that are even possible, right? But it was so friggin' brilliant to see it play out in that way. Like, everyone, there's all that people are kind of, you know, able to do that. And also, I wondered, like, what happens to your relationships after this?
Yes.
These are all, this is a small community. It's a small community.
Yeah.
Cool. Now
Yeah.
when they go, oh my God, I cannot believe that there's so many anti-vaxxers in the room.
Yes. Yes.
How many of you don't have your children vaccinated? Was the funniest. I don't know. I laughed pretty hard. But
Well,
yeah.
a surprising thing is that he wrote this in 2018. Many people have said about this play, well, we didn't have Zoom in 2018, but yes, we did. We just weren't all as attuned to it as we are. COVID changed Zoom and made it blow up, obviously, but it was still around. He obviously had and apparently most of the play in 2018 was very much what it is today, with the exception of the very final scene, which obviously is meant to be a wink to COVID, et cetera, et cetera. I love, by the way, that somebody on here said, "Oh yeah, we're getting some comments in here saying from an anonymous attendee." I love it. Anonymity dissolves any filter of ownership? Question mark, exclamation point. I think that's funny from an anonymous attendee. It's brilliant, and that what people will say in anonymous that they won't say in person. I have to also just give some props to the timing of that whole scene is really led by our stage manager, who's pushing a button up in the booth, and her comedy timing is really kind of a brilliant part of that scene. And she even said the other day, I decided to wait a little bit longer for the final laugh or whatever it was, the final Leslie thumbs up or whatever it was, the face that comes at the end. And she said, and because there was she's very aware of her timing in the middle of all this, which is such a funny part of it all. Adam, did you have thoughts about that too? I mean, I love what you said, Adia, and I like your idea of like, well, what if this scene was, it probably less funny and less appropriate for the theater, but it might be a lot more healthy for the actual community itself. Adam, did you have thoughts about that as well?
I mean, a couple of quick thoughts. One, we run a program out here called Dear Stranger. It's a letter writing program, and we send out an invitation to anyone to write a letter and address it, Dear Stranger. It could be about how do you keep your community safe? Maybe that's the invitation. You write about your community, you send it in, we then swap it with someone else with a different zip code. So I get your letter, you get mine. And I bring that up to say, like, that's another kind of anonymous interaction. But there's something about it that is taking as its focal point the fact that we don't know each other, and prefacing the word stranger with the word dear. And obviously it's that sense of dear that's lost from a lot of what happens online. And at the same time, like, we're in a room where I'm in Portland, Adia's in Oakland, I assume most of you are in the Chicago area, and that is unbelievable. It is unbelievable that we can, at the push of a button, be in a room together thinking about how we live in community together.
Yeah.
So I think what we mostly need to do is adjust our expectations of what's possible and try to be realistic about small tweaks that make it more likely that we treat each other dearly rather than with antipathy. And that's hard, and we need to keep trying to do it. But one of the nice things about the clips of the play that I saw is that you have both the proximate community, the community that's in a room together, and the online community. So you have both happening, plus the third community of the spectators watching all this. And so I think it gets us thinking about how much we're implicated in the questions, or how much we're sitting safely where we are and just pointing at it and judging it. And those feel very different. And that points back to the question of responsibility most of all.
That's so great. Go ahead, Grace.
Sorry. I think it's really interesting, this scene happening in a theater show, because theater at its core is about listening. It's like one of the few places you can go and, like, you can't be on your phone. Front of house will come tap you on the shoulder and tell you to turn it off, and like you're fully focused on this moment. And it's a scene about not listening. And there's like too many things going on to be able to listen. So I always find that juxtaposition really fascinating to be a part of.
it's so weird that he wrote it in a way that the actual dialogue by the live actors on stage is almost completely unheard. And he says his point, and he writes a little note to the actors and to the director saying, if you wait for them to stop laughing, this will become a 3-hour play, because you will literally have to wait so long to be able to get your lines in there. So they've got, let me tell you, they've got a real scene happening. It doesn't seem like it, because you are almost, as it stands in the theater, you almost don't hear it at all. But I think I guess he must have, I wonder if he knew that when he actually wrote it, or if that just happened when they got into the theater and everybody's laughing. As I've said to a few people, I think I don't remember a play where I laughed almost on every other line for 10 or 12 minutes in a scene. It's an unusual situation, especially, frankly, Timeline, we do plays inspired by history that connect to social political issues of today. That happens very rarely for us, that we're getting that many laughs. So I think it's a lot of fun. Adam, there's two things I want to come back to. Well, I'm going to stay on this subject for a second. I like the idea, and I wonder how you all feel about this, Adia and Adam and Grace too, about how does theater really create empathy? And does it really create, is it easier to have empathy in a theater or at a movie, or in a TV show? And do you think those kinds of empathies around someone else's story that's very different from you, maybe saying something that you don't believe in, but all of a sudden you're watching it through a character? It sort of reminds me of what you were talking about with the letter, Adam, because in a way there's a third personness to it. Obviously our job in the theater is to create empathy, to draw you into a story. What I'm really wondering, though, is, do you think that has the power to change people? We dream that it does, but I'd like to hear from you guys if you think it does or not, and if it's any kind of lasting change on people.
Yeah, that's the question, right? So
Right.
two quick thoughts, neither of them comprehensive in themselves. The first is, you mentioned the phrase "the social contract" before.
Yeah.
A guy who wrote a book called The Social Contract is a guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 18th century Genevan philosopher, and he criticizes the theater because what it gives us is, it gives us a temporary jolt of empathy or compassion, and then we walk out crying, feeling great about ourselves, and pass the beggar in the street.
Yeah.
But we not only pass them, but we feel better about ourselves because we've had this empathetic reaction to the poor person we've seen on stage, even as we walk by someone. So that's one critique of what happens in the theater. But then think about something like a novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe, which people go to town on it as a novel, but that novel, even President Lincoln said essentially that novel had a huge part in changing the country's attitude towards slavery and race relations. So I say that to say, it's clear that we feel empathy when we inhabit someone else's story, make it our own. The question is, what's next? And that's one that everybody, for the most part, answers on their own. I don't know, Adia, what do you think about this one?
Gosh, yeah, but I actually was thinking about this a lot. Part of me wonders if empathy is really the target, or the intended, or even the actual. Because I don't know if I necessarily have to identify with, or even have some kind of emotional reaction, as much as I've come to a point of understanding that enables me to act in some way. And and maybe that's just like my own like personal neurodivergence, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot with respect to how we choose to represent. Because I think I told you, Nick, that I had some experience working in theater. I obviously write a lot for people, trying to be persuasive, but I'm not sure that what I'm trying to persuade or shape is like something a bit different. That said, there is something actually about the audience experience for me that's it's like less than the portrayal and the portrayal and my ability to identify or understand or get to the story, but being able to be with others as we kind of, and having the opportunity to grapple with what we've seen and what we can do about it. Like, that's the potential that I see in the theater space. Like, that's why I was listening to people around me. They said, "Oh, that part was really funny," and there's a few people who were like, "I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read," and I
Yeah.
said, "That was the point."
Yeah.
Like, so, or if I don't know if that's making sense, but that was sort of the thing that made me feel a part of that. Like, that seems to be the lesson too from Uncle Tom's Cabin, is, not, even though I do think that sort of sentimental humanitarian thing was a part of the style and the impact, it also is about like the other movements that are happening as a result, right? How people are able to talk to each other about the things that are going on. That's where the action happens. That's why I tell Russo he can, he doesn't know he's talking.
And I
Yeah.
appreciate that idea as somebody in the theater, because, in some ways, Adam, you're bringing up the Rousseau thing is so accurate and so true, and there's no denying it. And yet we believe, and I think you're somewhat making a differentiation between understanding and empathy, and those two things are very close to each other. They have a connection. They don't have to be the same thing. They could be the same thing. In some ways, I think this is like my life's mission, and Grace, part of your life's mission as well, is to try to believe that theater does have some kind of power beyond an immediate empathy and or an understanding that then just falls away as you walk off to dinner, and you walk past the person that's asking for money on the street, whatever that may end up being. And I appreciate your second point about the Harry Beecher Stowe. Yeah, I appreciate you too, because I think that's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to get better at how to make that more lasting. A lot of what we're trying to do at Timeline, because a lot of our mission is about social political issues of today, is that it's not just, hey, come be entertained, come have a little empathy and then leave, but we are continually, and that's we're in our 30th, coming up on our 30th season next year. We're coming up to our 30th anniversary in about a year, and the past 30 years we've slowly moved toward trying to think more about our place in the community, and more than just as entertainers and as teachers or whatever, but to try to think about what that next step is, and how to engage people beyond the 2 hours they're in the theater. It's why all of our I feel like I'm giving advertising for Timeline right now, but it is very much a part of what we are constantly thinking about. At Timeline, you're also going to get a program that's our backstory program that Lara Getch is very much, and the dramaturgs, Grace and Duran, who worked so hard on this show. They're really trying to contextualize the play and ask a lot of tough questions, and sometimes put out an opinion piece so that you have something to respond to, etc. And then in the lobby experience of these plays, we're also trying to engage you in some other questions and some further readings, as you all have been doing today, etc. So it's a big part of. I'm sorry, I'm the moderator, and I've just become my own panelist. But I wanted to sort of say that it's so important to us. This question is, and it's something we struggle with a lot, of how to not just be somebody, a company that's getting you to empathize for 2 hours and then you're leaving. It's why we're building a theater where people can come early and stay late. It's not just so we can sell you some coffee and a glass of wine afterwards, but that you're actually there talking about this play, and hopefully it embeds itself in your brain and in your body and in your heart, and get you thinking about it. So Adia, that afterwards you are talking about it and asking questions and kind of taking it to the next step, etc. Grace, maybe that's a good thing to ask you about. Do you, have you that's the job in many ways of a dramaturg. A lot of times is to help with that idea.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think what's super cool about working on a show is you do get this experience with empathy because you have to step into these characters and it's like putting yourself in their shoes, which is like the epitome of what a lot of empathy is. Where from the audience, it can be more like sympathy, like you're watching for 2 hours and you feel sympathetic for their strifes. So I feel like dramaturgy can bridge that gap a little bit by providing statistics or stories that transcend outside of the show. So that's why Timeline is such a cool place to work as a dramaturg because you get to do this backstory stuff and these lobby elements to help push it a little bit further until, as Adam said, like eventually it is a what action you take from creating that understanding with someone is such an individual thing. Yeah.
Adam, I know that one of the, at least the tenets of your past work has been that a way to, gosh, I apologize if I'm saying this wrong, but that having an object or a play or a book or something to discuss is a means to get multiple points of view, at least a common ground. And that's in a way, that's exactly what this play is as well. Is how long have you been working with that notion, with
Well,
that idea?
I'm like as old as the hills, and I've been doing a version of this for a long time. But I think when you think about how do we get people talking about hard stuff,
Yeah,
one of the challenges is if I have to talk about myself, my own body, or my
right.
kids and their physical experience,
Yeah,
it can be really hard to see anyone else's experience, and it asks a lot of people to enter into mine. But if you put something that itself is invulnerable and is susceptible to many interpretations in front of a group, they have both a shared experience and a way to enter into experience that's not theirs. You can go deep quickly and more safely than you otherwise would. So, I mean, I'm just coming out of 2 days. One thing we do out here is we also train groups of people to lead challenging community conversations. And I think one of the interesting things about the way we approach it is we do use objects. We try almost always to ground hard conversations in at least some time with a shared experience of an object, whether it's an image or a short poem or a song, something that everyone can look at, because this stuff's hard to talk about, and they create a commonality as we try to understand them. So I've been in this for a long time. I have real belief that that shared object, that shared experience offers something that few other things do.
Mm, that's great. Adia, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I always have thoughts. Oh,
I figured you might.
but well, no, I mean that's sort of how we kind of enter teaching as well. Like at least when I'm teaching about these kinds of things, because obviously this stuff like vaccine hesitancy or a legacy or history of medical experimentation and all of those things kind of play into how we thinking about future. A lot of my students want to go into public health or anthropology or they want to work in communities that are not their communities. And so a lot of times I'm having to, this is the same kind of approach that we're having, is to think about, to go watch film, to see plays, to, yes, and engage with certain kinds of objects of various kinds to be able to work through and talk about and study what it means to be human and how we work together to build better worlds. So that's sort of like that's the impetus, that's the growing. That's why I was so excited about the play actually. Is that possibility for the conversation. So thank you
I
for
love
that
that.
anyway.
Thank you. And I'm going to wrap it up here and say thank you to the three of you. It's been a joy chatting with you, and we've been sort of all over the place in this conversation, but it's ultimately it's been a conversation about kind of community building and about points of view and God love you having a conversation about theater. That's always exciting to me too, and I think to our audiences. So thank you for all of that. Thank you for your expertise and your thoughts on this play. Thank you for taking the time to check it out and be a part of this. So I really want to say how much I appreciate that and how I know all of our folks that are watching appreciate it as well. So thank you.
Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to everyone who joined. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll see you later.